Okay, very good afternoon, my dear students, once again. In the previous class, we had a small introduction towards the Restoration period, right? We traced the history from the Restoration age to the Neoclassical period. So once again, let us have a quick recap of the characteristic features of the age, along with sociological, political, ecclesiastical changes that happened during the Restoration period. So once again, let us have a quick recap and then we can move on to The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope, who seems to be the representative poet of the satire during the Augustan period, during the Augustan age in the 18th century. So once again, let us have a quick recap of all the sociological, political and ecclesiastical as well as economical backdrop of the Restoration period, the same PPT which I have shared with you, and then we can move on to the text itself. So I told you in the last class itself, it is very important that you need to be aware of all the social, political, economical as well as the other major changes that happen during any period of time in order to understand a literary text. So that is very essential. That is a major idea of sharing this PowerPoint presentation, which highlights all kinds of information, background information to understand the period in a better way, right? So just a quick recap, what happened during the Restoration period. And this Restoration period ranges between 1660 to 1798, right? So already I told you it can be, this same period, Restoration literature can be split into three parts. One is the Restoration age, next one is the Augustan age, and third one is the age of Johnson, right? So we have three stages of Restoration period. One is the Restoration age, ranges between 1660 to 1700. And in that period alone, we were introduced to the comedy of manners, a unique subgenre of the comedies. In plays, we were introduced to the comedy of manners. And the comedy of manners is nothing but a play dealing with the manners and conventions of a highly sophisticated, rich aristocratic society. And number two comes as the Augustan age, and this is the age where we have to accommodate Alexander Pope, right? The great poet of this age, Augustan age, 1700 to 1750, in which we have poetry of personal exploration and development of the genre called novel, and in poetry we have a development of a special form called satire. Finally, we have the age of Johnson, that is between 1750 to 1798. So this period is also called as an age of sensibility, a transitional period between neoclassicism and romanticism. So Restoration, then comes Augustan period, then comes the age of Johnson, and then after 1798 with the publication of preface to the lyrical ballads, what happens? The period of Romantic age starts. So please make note of this PowerPoint presentation. Look at the slide. First comes the Restoration, then comes the Augustan age, finally comes the age of Johnson. Note down the years also. Let us have a quick recap of the political changes, right? The period of Restoration starts after Oliver Cromwell's short period of rule between 1589 to 92. That's all. Just for 3 or 4 years he ruled. That is why this short period is called as the period of interregnum. Interim rule, a period of interregnum. It even happens even in India. When the chief minister goes to jail or due to unavoidable circumstances, or if the chief minister dies, what happens? A chief minister will be appointed for interim arrangement. That is called as a period of interregnum. In 1640, when Charles I was essentially forced to reconvene the parliament because there was a rebellion against his rule in Scotland. And in 1642, First English Civil War started, because it was naturally a conflict between the king's supporters versus the parliamentarians, right? So people who supported the parliament versus people who supported the king, that is monarchy. Parliamentarians versus the loyalists of the king. And Charles I naturally had to surrender to the Scots in 1646. He lost the war, right? And a civil war, first civil war of England, that is between 1642 to 1646, comes to an end. And Charles II, he helped to lead the forces loyal to Parliament. Oliver Cromwell helped leading the forces of the loyal to the Parliament to victories because he was against the king. Oliver Cromwell wanted to restore the power of the Parliament. But in the Restoration period, always talks about the restoration of the power of the monarchy. That is, the restoration of power by Charles II. After Oliver Cromwell was removed from power, right, Charles II comes back from exile, from France, right? This period is called as the Restoration period, right? Again, the Scots were defeated. Parliament was reformed in 1651, and Cromwell sought to establish a united government combining England, Scotland, and Ireland. Right? He dissolved the Parliament again in 1655, but he refused to crown himself as the king. But he called himself as the Lord Protector of England. He declared himself with the title as the Lord Protector of England. He just ruled between 1655 to 58, just a period of 4 years. And England at that period was totally exhausted and tired because of the strict rule of Puritan age. There was a strong instability in the political scenario after the death of Oliver Cromwell, and then Charles II was restored back to power and he returned back from France. And for the sake of political gains, he embraced Protestantism, but he remained a Roman Catholic secretively at heart. Please bear it. Right, we can skip it. So the period of restoring the powers of the king is called as the Restoration period. So parliament and judicial systems were revamped, right? King's power dominated. Parliament became submissive to the king, and two important political parties emerged. They were called as the Whigs and the Tories. The Tories were higher in number and they want to destroy the religious dissent and they want to purify the Anglican church and allows the church to coexist with the rural England. And the Whigs were minorities, right? The Whigs were minorities, but they were very wealthy. They followed the doctrine of toleration and had alliance with the Puritans. They want to again propagate the rules and principles of Puritanism. Whigs are supporters of the Puritanism, right? And had strong commercial and trade connections. Tories were supporters of the royal authority, that is the king. Tories were the supporters of the king. The Whigs were the supporters of the parliamentarianism, that is people. And they want to again impose the rules and regulations of the Puritanic religion, right? So remember, the Tories were the supporters of the king. Whigs were the supporters of parliamentarians. Ecclesiastical changes, religious changes. The bishops and the prayer books were restored. Anglican attitude was seen because it replaced the Puritanism. Even Charles II pretended having embraced Protestantism, right? But he remained to be a Roman Catholic at heart. So all the Roman Catholics were removed. Puritanism actually was replaced. Now we have we have Protestantism, and Roman Catholics were all removed from power. All kinds of political and social power. Even atheism was accepted. Protestantism seems to be a little more accommodative in nature, right? It comes with a compromise in religious rules and regulations. So it even recognized atheists, right? And there was no penal punishment for irreligious people or these atheists. One such example is the Quaker community existed during the period along with Protestantism, founded by a man called George Fox, right? Now we move on to the social and cultural changes. in which the nobles and lords, they gained their power back. Naturally, they were all close associates with the king. When the king again was restored to power, these people again, they started taking their power on their own hands, right? And the roundheads like Milton were forced to disappear. The Royal Society of London was established. Many scientific experiments were promoted, so scientific temper significantly increased. Example, Robert Boyle and Isaac Newton, right? Science and religion coexisted. The raw theaters in literature, theaters were reopened and they enjoyed royal support. Even the kings, the lords and the nobles supported the reopening of the theaters. During the Cromwell's period, all the theaters were closed. Again, when Charles II came back to power, all the theaters were reopened, right? So people were totally dissatisfied and angry towards Puritanism, right? People were demanded of moral strength and spiritual fervor. That is what Puritanism demanded. People were irritated, right? When you insist so much of moral values, especially at the period of teenage period, you must be aware, you feel very irritated when someone gives you advice. So like that, people wanted to move out of the clutches of Puritanism. So Charles II's court was considered to be the most shameless of all courts because people were forced to take sides. So either you must support Whigs or the Tories. Either be a Protestant or a Roman Catholic. Either support the common middle classes or the aristocrats. So take a side. So people had to choose between Whigs or Tories, Protestants or Catholics, the common middle class people or the aristocrats. Come on, choose a side. That is the job left out to the people. Right. So there was a strong hint of satire and criticism in that period, especially, and it can be very noticeable during the period called 1672 to 1730. Already I told you the period of satire was very dominant during the early 18th century and the last of or the end of 17th century. Right. The age made people become more self-contained and self-restricted. They started to live in closed circles. People became inward-looking, highly introverts. So the entire age of restoration is an antithesis to the age of Elizabeth. That is what we understand. We also had a strong rules for printing and censorship. So even printing presses had to obtain license from the monarch to operate the presses. But even in those times, secret printing presses were established and they were given penal punishments. If they were found out by the police, they were penalized very severely. And this licensing act was periodically revised, which was first in 1663 in the parliament, and it was repealed. It was removed from the parliament in the year 1696 during the rule of James II. So till then, from 1663 to 1696, the licensing act was in force, and people, especially those who run the presses, they had to seek the approval from the king, right, from the lords and nobles before they publish any news. And one such great voice against this kind of restrictions came from John Milton through his famous prose piece, which expressed his voice for the printing press, which expressed his freedom for the printing press, is none but John Milton's Areopagitica, right? So in that time, Oxford and Cambridge presses dominated the printing industry in England. So some of the other events were, England became a social and cultural hub, right? It was a center place for all social and cultural activities. There was significant growth in trade and business because so many colonies were established. English forces started establishing colonies in the countries which they have captured, right? In 1684, the first public library was established in London. In 1694, the Bank of England was established. Plagues continued to haunt people, right, for a long time up to the Great Fire, right? Till 1665, so many plagues continued, yes, throughout the London. It was very common. And the Act of Union was passed in the year 1667, which made England join hands with Scotland. England, Scotland, Wales, all they have become one under one king, common king, that is Charles II, but with separate parliaments. England, Wales and Scotland all joined together because of the Act of Union passed in the year 1667, and all these three countries were made to come under the rule of Charles II under the same king, but they had separate parliaments. So there was a shift from European supremacy from Italy to France. Slave trade was quite common. In 1666, London experienced a great fire which lasted for 5 days, resulting down in the burning down of 89 churches. But England or London recovered in a magnificent pace, right? And from which there was a total control of the explosion of plague because sanitation improved significantly. 52 churches were rebuilt thanks to an architect named Christopher Wren, who played a significant role in the rebuilding of London after the fire in 1616. Coffee house culture was also quite common. Only men were allowed, and these places served as cheap and informal places for social interactions. People were made to pay only a single penny to enter into the coffee houses. People enjoyed coffee, gossip, and literary discussions, right? Just by paying a penny. People also discussed some local issues. They also discussed the news of the day. They discussed the matters of mutual concerns. So it was a place of social gathering. A social chit-chat happened in the coffee houses, right? So literary and intellectual trends of this age, and they promoted Greek and Latin literature. And there was a slow movement or slow support towards the classical literatures, Greek and Latin, right? So it is quite common. Literature is also like a cycle. It is a cyclic process, right? Fashion, like fashion. Fashion changes, right? The way we wear our shirts. For a certain period, we used to wear some tight shirts. And then slowly the shirts will become very loose, right? Again, the collars will be very lengthy. Again, the collars will be very short, right? So for in the case of women, they also have long cuffs. And then the cuffs were shortened. Again, they will remove the sleeves at all. Totally, they remove the sleeves. That is called a sleeveless. Am I right or not? So literature is also like a fashionable cycle, like a fashionable cycle. It moves in a cyclic way, right? Literature also does the same. Any doubts regarding coffee houses or up to this presentation? Any doubts? Shall I continue?
No, sir. It's
Yes, sir.
sir, continue, sir.
Just giving a recap, that's why. So then what happens? We also, I told you that we have a great flyer and coffee house culture was discussed. People were classified in gentlemen, and the people gave great importance to the birth, the royal blood, right? Dignity comes from their birth and not from their character. People considered taste and virtue come from the birth, genetically, not socially acquired. These tastes cannot taste and social status cannot be acquired, and they have to come by blood, right? In a legacy. And we have also have the period of publication of dictionary and encyclopedias, right? So that is why we also witness why the period is called as an Augustan period or neoclassical period. The title of the Augustan period refers to similarities between England because it was compared to the period of Octavius Caesar. It was compared to the rule of Octavius Caesar, Caesar Augustus. His name was Caesar Augustus, who lived between 63 BC to 14 AD. He ruled in the time after Julius Caesar's assassination because it was also a period of interregnum. Julius Caesar was a huge monarch. He was an emperor. He was assassinated and order had to be restored, and that was done by the Augustus Caesar or Caesar Augustus. He was also known as Octavius. Peace was restored to the people of Rome. It was often classified as the second founder. The same way in England, Charles II came back from exile in France and restored the power in England. That is why we named the period as Augustus period, named after Caesar Augustus, right? We also have a reason for similarities in literary history. Most educated people of the time are familiar with classical works because In England, there was a trend or fashion of reading of the Greek and Latin literatures, which was very quite popular during the period of Augustus Caesar or Caesar Augustus. Neoclassical, nothing means new classics, right? They enjoyed reading the allusions and political connections of the time through the classical characters and themes. That is why it was called as a neoclassical, new classics. The age of reason and enlightenment can be looked after a later period, right? So with this, we can have a quick recap with the end of the social and political, economical, as well as ecclesiastical changes of the period were highlighted. Now we move on to the style called, the unique style that developed during the Augustan period is called as satire. Both fiction as well as poetry were very much satirical in nature. Satire is an indirect way of commenting on social or political issues. Make a note of it. Satire is an indirect way of commenting on social or political issues. Sometimes it can be a personal satire, but mostly satire dealt with social or political issues of in a broader context. These satires reveal how people and things, the irony in their behavior, the contrast in their behavior. People are self-contradictory in nature. People, they preach, but they don't follow what they preach. Right? Do you understand what I mean? People who simply preach to others, but they themselves do not follow it. Am I clear? People who may preach things to others, but they don't follow it themselves. Right? People, they're full of vanity. Right? False pride. People are filled with false pride. The satire reveals how people and things are not what they seem or what they appear on the surface. On the surface level, they appear to be very dignified, very rich, very noble, full of moral values, but secretively they will lead a secret life, like in the case of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. How many of you had heard about Dr. Jekyll and Hyde? Anybody? Anybody? Can anyone unmute your mic and tell me, has anyone heard about R.L. Stevenson's famous work, a short fiction called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Anybody?
No, sir. No, sir.
The small fiction.
No, sir.
Yes. Okay, you are not familiar. It was written by a famous writer called R.L. Stevenson. The theme or the major story or the major theme revolves around the concept called schizophrenia. That is nothing but split personality, like in the case of movie Onion. In Onion movie, we find three different personalities: Ambi, Onion, and Remo. Right? These are all suppressed subconscious images, and the same individual, he creates these kind of characters in order to give shape to his bent on feelings, suppressed feelings. He creates some images, personalities, right? That is called split personality. So same case happens in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a very famous one. Try to read it. It is freely available. The strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Make a note of it. The famous work of R.L. Stevenson. The strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll was a very socially respectable person, a doctor, a physician, who had many high-class friends, who had earned a name for himself in the society, right? And for him, he also suffered from schizophrenia, like in the case of having a dual personality or split personality disorder. He invents a character named Mr. Hyde. Make a note of it. Dr. Jekyll, a physician, invents an imaginary character called Mr. Hyde, Hyde. Jekyll, Jekyll. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He invents a particular salt by accident, a chemical salt. Dr. Jekyll invents or happens to come across a small impurity in a salt, a chemical salt. He accidentally finds out a salt which transforms a human being into someone else. So after taking the chemical compound, the salt, his body transforms. His body gets deformed, right? Crooked, bent on shape. The height even reduced. The height of the individual even reduced, right? With a hunchback, like a small hunchback, with a drooping figure, evil-looking figure. Jekyll was a highly learned person, a highly respectable social personality. Hyde is just his opposite. He is an evil fellow, full of evil intentions, but both these characters are one and the same. Both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are same. They are the same individual with different personalities. We can discuss the work later, right? I'll get back to the introduction part. Let us finish it off. So satire reveals how people and things, right, are not what they appear to be on the surface, right? That is the main intention, is to ridicule the society, to make fun of the society, to make fun of the foolishness, to make fun of the idiosyncrasies, right? That is the main idea. Satire also served as a witty way to criticize, right? It is a witty way, a clever way, not to hurt anyone. Please remember, satire is not meant for hurting anyone. It is meant for criticizing, right? This the mock heroic poem we are going to read, The Rape of the Lock, is also a witty satire on the vanities of young people. I'm not talking about women alone, but about both men and women in general. Enlightenment writers were often clever and sarcastic, and their work tended to attract an intelligent readership. Right? People have to understand what the poet or the writer actually intends to share. So, a common satirical technique was used to create a character that was a stranger to a country, a naive fellow, an ordinary fellow, an unfamiliar character with the local society. Generally, he will be ignorant or silly in character, right? The common technique is to create a character, like in the case of Mac Flecknoe. How many of you heard about the character called Mac Flecknoe? Anybody? Can anyone give an answer? Famous work by John Dryden, Mac Flecknoe. It is a strong satire by John Dryden on a famous writer called Thomas Shadwell. Is anybody aware of it? Students, if you are really interested to clear set or net examinations, you must be thorough with the history of English literature. Please make note of all the important points I am sharing with you. So read a lot, read voraciously. You have to become voracious readers, and you have to remember all the facts. Please be very, very cautious. Right. John Dryden's famous work is called as Mac Flecknoe. He made fun of a character called Thomas Shadwell. Right. And we may not much bother about the neoclassical age. We can talk about Pope. You must be already in the Puritan age. John Milton, Dryden were there, and we talk about Alexander Pope. He lived between 1688 to 1744. He was one of the major representative poets of the Augustan period. Make a note of it. Alexander Pope was one of the major representative poets of the Augustan period. His famous works are the Pastorals and an essay on criticism, and in which these two works made him gain recognition for his wonderful usage of the heroic couplet, because the two lines will rhyme each other. There will be a rhyme scheme for once in every two lines. That is called as the heroic couplet. Alexander Pope is the representative poet of the period. He lived between 1688 to 1744. Make a note of it. Right. So let us get into the other details of Pope. Before we get into the poem itself, Alexander Pope not only gained mastery over satire, he is a great poet and an essayist who expressed the form of satire to mock at irrelevant and less important things in the society. Make a note of it. Alexander Pope, in the 18th century, he was the master of satire and in the use of heroic couplets. He reveals, he exposes and mocks at the limitations and customs that prevailed during the Augustus period, the Augustan age in the 18th century. He mocked at the customs and practices that were in practice during the 18th century. Satire, as I told you earlier, it is not meant to hurt anyone, but it will have a biting effect, a scathing effect, right? Pinpointing the errors, right? Pointing out the errors of the errors in the behavior, their cultural or in their social behaviors, right? And what happens in this rape of the lock? It is a clash between a private clash between two rich families, aristocratic families. One is the Fermors, the other one is the Peters. The Fermors and the Peters. There were two families in London, Fermors, Fermors, the Fermors, versus another family is called as the Peters, Petres, Peters. So it was a quarrel, a private fight between two royal aristocratic families. And this rape of the lock is meant to make fun, mock at, jeer at the idiosyncrasies followed by the young people of that period, right? So in that satire, using the mock heroic form, remember Alexander Pope uses satire and the mock heroic form in order to express candid feelings with utmost honesty and sympathy. He has sympathy for the girl, no doubt about it. He has sympathy for the victims. The poem is candid in nature. It is full of it has an honest tone. It has an honest tone, and it is filled with sympathy. The main target, the main character Alexander Pope focuses on is none other than Belinda. And Belinda's character is a representative character of the decadent, aristocratic society. Belinda stands to represent the decadent, aristocratic society, the society filled with vanities, the girl who gives so much of importance to makeup, right? The girl values trivial things to be of high nature, right? So for that purpose, Alexander Pope chooses a mock heroic form for his satire, The Rape of the Lock. So what happens here is, first we need to understand the qualities of an epic first. In order to understand the qualities of a mock heroic poem, we need to understand the qualities of an epic first. So what are the qualities of an epic? Usually, an epic is a long narrative poem. Make a note of it. Just note about the qualities of an epic first. It is a long narrative poem. Number one. And usually epics deal with great heroes and heroines. Epic poems deal with great or not larger than life heroes and heroines. Very important. Number one, epics are usually long narrative poems. Number two, they have great people as its heroes and heroines, not ordinary people. Not ordinary people will be heroes and heroines in epics. Right? What about when you remember the word epic, immediately what comes to your mind is John Milton's Paradise Lost. Right? In English literature, immediately we come across what strikes our mind is Paradise Lost, the classical example of epic poems. Right? So first one is a long narrative poem. It talks about great heroes and heroines. Number three, supernatural presence. In epic poetry, there are elements of supernatural beings. Like in the case of Paradise Lost, again, what happens? We have the forefathers who are Adam and Eve, even God himself, Ariel, Gabriel, everybody. In what happens in the Paradise Lost, we have great characters, right? The great parents, Adam, Eve, Gabriel, God himself, everybody is there. Mephistopheles, Satan himself. So we have great people as heroes and heroines. So supernatural presence is quite natural. Number four, elevated and dignified grand style. Make a note of it. Elevated and dignified grand style. Elevated and dignified grand style will be followed for the language. And the setting will be usually a vast geographical setting. Right? Like everything will be larger than life. Like imagine like in the case of a Bahubali. Right? Can anyone tell me what the real story of Bahubali is? Is it very innovative? Is it very new? Is the story of Bahubali a very new one, which nobody has ever heard about before? Anybody? Can anyone tell me what is the story of Bahubali? A simple story of revenge. A simple story of capturing or craving for power. Am I right or not? A simple story which two brothers are craving for power. It is an ordinary story. Is it a novel story? Is it a novel idea which we have not come across before? Is working Kelly story. Why was Bahubali so successful in spite of having a small ordinary storyline? Anybody? Bahubali was very attractive, right? Even we have seen the movie more than 10 or 15 times, everybody. Especially during the lockdown period, thanks to satellite channels which have been repeatedly showing the same movies again and again. But still we find Bahubali movie to be attractive and fascinating. Why? Anybody?
Settings, settings, graphics.
Yeah, I know your voice is not clear. Please repeat it.
Graphics.
Graphics.
Settings.
Okay, good. She's talking about the use of graphics. What I'm talking about is the use of or presenting everything in larger than life size. Presenting everything in larger than life sizes. The waterfall, the kingdom, the chariot, the bull, the elephant, everything will be 10 or 100 or 1,000 times bigger than the normal figures. So that is how even in epics we have larger than life figures. We have supernatural presence. We have the presence of gods, fairies, angels, devils, spirits, and so on. And the setting will be also a very vast setting. What happened in Paradise Lost? We had the Garden of Eden, the earth, the heaven, the hell, everything, right? We had the entire universe as its setting. Paradise Lost covers universe, entire cosmos as its setting. So, in an epic poem, usually it covers a vast geographical setting. Make a note of it. Next one, usually epics deal with adventurous themes, themes that talk about adventure. So, what is so adventurous about Paradise Lost? Again, there is an adventure there. What is adventure? Venture. Adventure comes from the word called venture, a new journey, a new, a new trip, venturing towards something, a new initiative, a new step. That is called as a venture. Adventure, right? It is actually a development of the word venture, where we come across Eve wanted to explore the Garden of Eden, explore new things. The quest for exploration is the adventure part in Paradise Lost. Am I clear? Usually, epic poems deal with adventurous themes, themes of adventure. In Paradise Lost, we have an adventurous trip. What was the trip? She wants to explore the Garden of Eden alone without the help of Adam. Right? So that was the theme of adventure. And in epic poems, we also have a common element that is called as the invocation of the muses. Note it down. In epic poetry, we have a concept called the invocation, invocation, invocation of the muses. In order to give the divine power or the power of inspiration to kindle the writer to complete the work, right, he has intended to take up. So, invocation of muses is also quite common before they begin the text. John Milton also gives and also has recorded in the invocation of muses prayers to the angels to let him complete the task of writing the great epic Paradise Lost. One such classical character of muses is called as Calliope. Make a note of it. A classical musical muse, M-U-S-E. Muse is an angel in charge of providing inspirational power to the writers. Muse is the angel or spirit which provides the inspirational power to the writers for writing. In order to kindle their imagination, the muses are in charge of kindling the imagination of the writers to complete the text. Right? One such classical muse is called as Calliope. C-A-L-L-I-O-P-E. Calliope is a common character which we can find in classical epic poems. A classical muse character. Right. The questions asked in epic poetry will be also in epic nature. A very thought-provoking question will be there. A serious questions will be evoked. Serious questions will be asked in epic poetry. What is it? Whether God really wanted man and women or man and woman to be forbidden to all kinds of worldly knowledge or not. Is really God jealous on Adam and Eve? Look at the questions. I am raising some questions in Paradise Lost. Was God really jealous on Adam and Eve? It may be yes or no. You can argue on both sides. Look at my questions. Look at the seriousness of the questions. It is a very serious charge against the God. Whether God was really jealous of Adam and Eve, as pointed out by Satan. Because God has forbidden Adam and Eve to taste the fruit of knowledge. So, whether God was jealous. God had forbidden Adam and Eve to experience new knowledge. Is the charge true or not? Okay. Is the act of Eve a clear violation of disobedience, violation of trust, breach of trust, or a symbol of the Elizabethan Renaissance, a Renaissance spirit started to questioning everything, logically questioning everything based on reason, right? She asked questions. Why is it so? Why should not we taste the fruit? Why is it forbidden? If ordinary creatures like a snake is able to taste the fruit, why not human beings? So many questions are asked. All these questions are in epic nature, not ordinary questions. These questions are all in epic nature, right? Usually, epic poems also have a technique called in medias res. Make a note of it. It is a Latin term. In medias, medias, medias res, res. In medias res. This is a kind of technique followed by the epic writers or the epic poets to begin a story in the middle of a context. Make a note of it. In medias res means the story doesn't begin with the birth of a child. The story begins in the context. What happens in Paradise Lost? It starts in the context of the war between, the fight between, or the conflict between Satan versus God. This is called as in medias res. All the 12 books of Paradise Lost, what happens in book 9? Book 9 talks about the disobedience of Eve. Eve eating the fruit and committing the original sin. Right? The context is Eve having an argument with Adam to go alone and explore the Garden of Eden, and eventually she was seduced by Satan in the form of a serpent and she was made to taste the fruit. The technique used by epic poets are called as in medias res. And the epic poets commonly used techniques like, make a note of it, personification, anaphora, ANAPHORA. Personification. Number 2, anaphora, ANAPHORA. Number 3, alliteration. Alliteration. Number 4, extended similes. Number 4, extended similes. Number 5, allusions. I will explain over everything one by one. Number 5, use of allusions. And finally, for the epic category, we have God himself interferes as a character. These are the qualities of an epic. Please remember, what we have discussed so far are the qualities of an epic, not the mock heroic epic. We are going to study the poem which comes under the category called mock heroic poem, mock epic poem. But so far we have discussed the features of epic poetry. Only after understanding the qualities of epic poem, then only you can understand the qualities of mock epic, right? Am I clear? So we have seen the qualities of epic poetry. So let me give a quick recap of all the main points of epic poetry one by one. Usually they are all long narrative poems. Number 1. In that epic poetry, we have great men and women as heroes and heroines. Number 3, we have the presence of supernatural elements. Number 4, the style of the epic poetry will be usually a grandiloquent theme. Yes, sorry, grandiloquent style. grandiloquent style, elevated style, grand, elevated or dignified style, grandiloquent style. Setting will be of a grand geographical area. The setting will be of a grand, of a great or a vast geographical area. There will be an adventurous theme. The theme will be an adventure, exploration, a new venture, a new trial. There will be the invocation of muses. There will be invocation of muses. Epic questions will be asked. Epic questions will be asked. And poems usually begin, these epic poems usually begin in medias res. They begin in the middle of a context, not in a blunt way. And usually epic poems are filled with techniques like anaphora, personification, alliteration, extended similes, and epithets. Extended similes and epithets. We'll see everything one by one in the next classes. Don't worry. First, we'll finish off with the qualities of an epic, right? And finally, we also have the interference of God himself as one of the characters in an epic poem. It is very, very important. God himself comes as a character in epic poetry. So quickly, we can see a parallel for epic poetry now. Now we are going to discuss the qualities of a mock epic. So far we have seen the qualities of an epic. Now we move on to a mock epic. So number one, it is also a considerable long poem, but not that much long as a epic. It is a mock heroic poem, right? We told that we in the Rape of the Lock we have cantos. It's a long narrative poem, right? That runs up to 30 pages, right? Canto refers to a long narrative poem is called as a canto, a long poem, right? Number two, in mock epics, we have two kinds of styles. Make a note of it. We have two kinds of styles in mock epics. Number one, please clearly understand it. Subjects will be very elevated subjects, right? Very carefully look at the subject. The subject chosen will be of elevated subjects, right? And subjects will be elevated. Treatment will be very, very trivial. Please understand, there are two kinds of styles, owners. Subjects will be, either the subjects will be very elevated subjects, right? Subject matter will be very, very elevated. Ordinary people, trivial people. Otherwise, we have trivial subjects, ordinary issues, but given dignified treatment. Please understand the styles. Ordinary theme given epic treatment, dignified treatment. Otherwise, epic treatment, ordinary, or epic subjects, ordinary treatment. Just understand very clearly. Theme rumba grand irundhuchuna, treatment will be very, very less, trivial, ordinary. Treatment rumba dignified irundhuchuna, subject will be ordinary. Just the vice versa. There are two different types of mock epics. Either the subject or the treatment will be, one will be very dignified, another one will be very, very trivial. These are the two major styles we can find in mock epics. Okay. And very strong word is used here, an assault, like a rape, right? Rape is the word we use for cutting off a lock of hair. A very strong word of assault is used here. And another common usage is, here we also have supernatural presence. And I told you, they are not great men or heroes, they belong to royal families. Ordinary theme of cutting the hair, but given royal treatment. In the poem Rape of the Lock, we have ordinary theme of cutting the hair, but Elevated style was followed, right? That is why it is called as a mock heroic poem. Elevated grand style is followed here. But for what subject? For cutting of a hair, not for the trespass committed by Adam and Eve. That was a grand subject. That was a grand theme. Am I right? It was given grand treatment. But here, cutting off a lock of hair is an ordinary trivial issue. Subject is an ordinary one, but given an epic treatment. So that is why it is called as a mock heroic poem. Here in the epic we have vast geographical setting, but what happens here? It happens only in the ballroom dance. It's the ballroom of Belinda, right? We have a very limited setting here. There was a vast geographical setting. Here we have only a ballroom, right? Theme is also an adventurous. Here also an adventurous themes happen. What is it? The cutting of the lock of hair, the cutting of the pride or vanity of the people, right? The styles used in mock heroic poems are heroic couplet and iambic pentameter. One is heroic couplet, I told you, which rhymes in once in two lines. Over one line, we have a separate rhyme scheme that is called as heroic couplet. Number two is the use of iambic pentameter. Make a note of it. I will explain it. The voracious or wide usage of the technique called iambic pentameter, in which every poetic line will have 10 syllables and alternate syllables will be one unstressed and stressed syllable followed by one stressed. One stressed syllable followed by unstressed. Stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed. That is 5 each. 5 sets of stressed and 5 sets of unstressed syllables side by side, next to next, right? Placed side by side. That is called as iambic pentameter. Penta means 5. With internal rhymes, that is called iambic pentameter. In a single poetic line with 10 syllables, with one stressed and unstressed syllables. This is the method called iambic pentameter. So, with this, we come to the end of the presentation, which highlighted the features of the Restoration period in general, and I have also highlighted the common features of epic as well as mock heroic poetry.